Rich und Ehre, war sich der noch angesäche. So bist du ihr aller Ehre. Was ist Wundes hier geschäche? Dass ein Magd ein Kind gebar, ihre über aller Engel schar. Was das nicht ein Wunder gab.
This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary Holy Land from the heathen. This is Matt Pegas.
And this is Dan Baltic.
And we're here today with Brad Kelly, whom many of our listeners will probably be familiar with. He's a personality on Twitter, but also the co-host of the Art of Darkness podcast with former New Right guest Kevin Kautzman. And Brad is also a writer. He published his novel House of Sleep in January of last year, which we read in preparation for this podcast, and it's going to be one of the major things we're talking about. Brad also does art, I believe, to some extent.
I scribble. I'll doodle.
Right. Well, in any case, so what I mean to say is he's a multi-talented internet personality. Brad, welcome to the show.
I appreciate that. Yes, thanks for having me, guys. This is I love your show. I love what you guys are doing, so I'm really happy to be a part of it and be on. This is cool.
Well,
absolutely.
Great to have you.
Well, I thought an interesting place to start this podcast, this episode, especially perhaps because in House of Sleep, there's kind of a whole element where your main character is sort of, how would you say, just kind of circumstances line up for her to be at this retreat center, which we'll get to later. I thought, the process of us coming into contact, Brad, was sort of interesting too. It was around the time it was a little bit before New Right started, and I'd posted an image of what I called my Twitter book collection at the time, which was not actually very substantial, but it had some of the
Billy Pratt's book, I think.
Which one?
Billy Pratt's book.
Yeah, Billy Pratt's book was front and center, which had come out recently last summer, and then like Bronze Age Mindset and Delicious Tacos, kind of just like the greatest hits. And I threw the image up, and you responded, basically saying, you want another free addition to that, and and you mailed me free of charge House of Sleep. Now, I didn't actually end up reading the book until this year, but you did send it last year, which was very much appreciated. And it arrives. It was like a black bubble wrapped package with like silver. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, silver Sharpie lettering. It was all very sort of mystical. And then most mystical of all was that there was a tarot card sticking out of it.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds like me.
Yeah.
Yep.
I gather at the time you were looking to send the book out. I think you said it in your DM to me that you were looking to send the book out to as many interesting people as possible. And I gather you probably sent this package to many people.
Yeah, it would be dozens now. Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
well,
it's actually self-promotion, but it's a little bit of a magical ritual too, to be honest.
I don't doubt it. That's what I assumed. By the way, we'll get more into this later, but I think the degree to which you've been able to self-promote House of Sleep seems extremely effective, and we'll definitely ask you about your strategies there, because you got a lot of reviews from different corners of the internet, which is awesome. In terms of the ritual of it all, I have the book in the card right here. I have like the blur thing on on Zoom, but it's a Four of Pentacles.
Four of Pentacles, and that's from the I believe that's from the Hermetic Tarot deck.
Okay.
Yeah,
What
there's many different decks, obviously. So.
right, so it's not the basic. I was learning a little bit about this yesterday because I know very little about it actually, but it's not the
Sure.
basic weight deck. It's a
Y-
specifically
Yeah, it's not
hermetic.
the Rider Waite Smith deck that you most commonly will see, but there are dozens, hundreds of different decks. So
I
yeah.
see. So I guess my question then is, I mean, basically, will you? Is it too late? I mean, I got this last June, but can you interpret the significance of my pulling? I think it was reversed. It was a while ago,
Yeah,
but yeah,
yeah, I could definitely give you a symbolic interpretation of that card, and then it's up to you to determine whether or not that's meaningful to you, I guess. Um, the reverse thing, there's two schools within the tarot world. Well, there's many schools, but on this issue, there's two schools. There's a school who believes in reading reversals. I find some merit in that perspective. I kind of think it doesn't matter
mm-hmm.
if they're reversed or not. Mostly because even in the reversal, it's not that the symbology changes, it's that it gets inverted. So there's a way to phrase the symbology, the symbolic interpretation, so you can take the inverse or the straight reading and kind of digest it based on what means the most to you. So we'll just read it and I'll give you, I actually see in that outline, I pulled up so you can see the Rider Waite Smith version.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So little different. Pamela Coleman Smith illustrated, the what's called the pip cards or the minor arcana cards, which typically hadn't been done up to that point. So, Four of Pentacles. So a handful of things to kind of keep in mind there. So the Pentacles are one of the four suits. It's typically like a coin. In some decks, it's referred to as a coin. In Rider Waite Smith and a lot of other traditions, it has a 5-pointed star on it, but it doesn't have to. The way I look at this, and I didn't invent this, this is from, I kind of first started picking up on this with Robert Wang, but there were some other folks too, is in the Jungian system, there's four ways of four quadrants of mental activity. And the suits each suit represents one of these four. So there's wands would represent the intuitive quadrant, swords would represent the intellectual or cognitive component, cups would represent the feelings or emotions, and pentacles would represent the sensorium. So in real Renaissance fair level readings, they're going to treat that as things like money, hardtack, things that you can put your hands on. I think a more sophisticated reading puts it in the realm of sort of a card referring to the real world and how you see it, how you taste it, how you touch it, how you actually interact with the hardtack real world. It's really easy in like spiritual community or whatever to kind of pretend like the real world is irrelevant and it's just something we're trying to get away from. And I think that's ultimately dangerous, though there's some value to that idea, kind of that idealism. So we're in the realm of it's an earth signs. We're in the realm of the sensory, the what we can touch, what we can feel, what we can hold on to. So resources are like this too. Money is one, but things like health, to a certain extent, relationships, but not in so much the love part, a sort of a networked relationship, that you might have for business or friends or whatever. And knowledge, like education, might be caught up in this card. So, excuse me. So a Four of Pentacles, what you're seeing, particularly in the Rider Waite Smith deck, is fours. In this case, it's a partial completion. It's a partial having, but it's still somewhat premature. It hasn't reached full completion, but there's a moment of, okay, I've got these things and I've got to hang on to them. I've got to kind of possess them as much as I can. And that's why you see in the Rider Waite Smith, the guy looks fairly defensive, right? He's like hanging on to these things, and rightly so. I mean, they've been earned, they've been gathered through the experience of life. So it makes sense to hang on to them. What's worth noting, and the symbolism of these things goes so deep, you can never reach the bottom of it. So it's worth noting that in the Rider Waite Smith, where it's very on the surface, he's blocking some things with the coins. He's blocking what you might call the crown chakra. And whether you're into chakras or not, these are symbolic patterns that are very, very old. So they mean something, even poetically. The crown chakra, the heart chakra he's blocking. So, this is something about allowing the things that we hold on to, resources, money, knowledge, to block our active intelligence, in terms of finding new things, figuring new things out. It's like, I already know everything. I've already been around the block enough. And then over the heart is being careful not to, let those things block your compassion for other people. Right. So like most cards, there's positive and negatives. There's just sort of a warning, and it doesn't mean that you're doing any of these things necessarily, but it might be just a reminder like, hey, watch out. Don't let this happen to you. Right. Like, it doesn't mean you're even doing it now. Right. Like, there's cards of grief. They don't mean getting that card in a reading doesn't mean you're having grief. It's like a memento mori. It's like, hey, remember, like, stuff's going to happen that's not good.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. So and then the other thing that he's blocking is his feet. So the feet are very important in tarot. They depict our relationship to the world. So standing versus sitting. Standing is a more active, ready for action kind of position. Sitting is a more passive role. It's not positive or negative. There are times to act. There are times to sit down and just wait and see how things play out. The hanged man, his feet are pointed up to God, because he's the way that you can get out of stuck situations like being a hanged man is to just let God tell you what to do, basically. Right. Yeah. So the feet being blocked by the pentacles is, again, it's like, it's this, the things I know are all that I need to know. The things that I have are all that I need to have. The things that the relationships and resources I have are it. And I'm so scared of losing them that I'm maybe disallowing myself from getting any others.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense to me. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. And, I found myself in that position from time to time. For sure, that card has resonated with me in the past.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, no, sure. I definitely enjoyed the way that you sent the book over last year, and sort of I had always wanted to ask you that question. I think it's best that I asked it here live on a podcast.
Sure, no, that was fun, man.
Yeah, and I think it gets us into the right mindset, perhaps, for the podcast. And,
cool. Yeah.
I'll probably ask you more about tarot later too, and how you got into it. But
okay, yeah, please do. I love talking that stuff. So
for sure. But I guess before we let too much time pass, we should get into the novel, which again is House of Sleep, which listeners can buy on Amazon, and we'll definitely link to it. Cool. I guess to comment on the style, I finished the book yesterday. I found it to be, and as I said earlier, you've done a very good job kind of promoting this book, and there's a lot of interesting reviews from different corners of the internet, and I've seen a lot of comparisons. You've cited everyone from Cormac McCarthy to William Burroughs. A lot of people you've covered on Art of Darkness, honestly, as an influence, and I do see little bits of a lot of those people. One sort of buzzword that came up for me early on that I saw in some of the reviews, but that I don't think is totally accurate, but I'm going to say it anyway, is the notion of magical realism. Which is not necessarily a genre I'm a huge fan of.
I'm not either. I have sort of negative associations with stuff that's typically described as magical realism. So I've seen that too, and people say that, and to me, that's fine. They usually mean it when they say it. They usually mean it as a compliment. So it's been my perspective. So I kind of take it as that. But to me, magical realism has a narrow definition, and I don't think House of Sleep. Personally, I don't think it fits.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily, conveying that either.
Yeah.
I just,
I see that. Yeah, I appreciate it. It's a more thoughtful perspective. Yeah.
Kind of, I don't know, there's something that was kind of triggering me to think in those terms, but also it's clearly not quite that. And the way you describe yourself online is a sci-fi writer. That is PSY-FI. So I assume a portmanteau of psychological and science fiction, no? Or
yeah. I would say sci, and part of that is these sort of etymological roots and associations of psi. So psychology, psychological, psychedelic,
right.
Psychic,
Right.
all of those kind of come back to soul essentially. So
Well, that certainly, I mean, that seems as good. That seems the best possible description then of your writing, because all those PSY concepts you just cited, psychedelia, psychology, and even the psychic dimension, are, they loom heavily, both thematically in House of Sleep, but also in terms of the writing style. It is psychedelic in parts. It is perhaps psychic in parts, and it's definitely psychological. The way I would describe the overall style is, and I think I've seen other people describe it thus, so this may not be a totally original thought, but you basically write in a very sort of gritty form of realism, where I can see a little bit of that sort of Burroughs influence. I don't know if what's his name? Why is it not coming to me? Not Buchanan, but Bukowski. Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's like, there's an element of that, but then you're describing, it's like it's gritty realism, but describing really elaborate, at times even kind of floral, psychedelic, psychic. You're describing complicated psychic realities in a realistic and at times gritty way. I don't know. Does that resonate?
Yeah, definitely. And it sort of marries the novel I wrote before this, that basically 10 people have read, and there's no way to get your hands on it unless you know me personally, was a very gritty, realistic, like borderline crime novel set in Detroit. Right.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of where I kind of cut my teeth on how to write a novel. And then, have since aesthetically and sort of philosophically and creatively expanded, but those sentence by sentence style is still there, I think.
Equal parts gritty and dreamy is how it struck me. Kind of like a marriage of the two, where it's very psychedelic, very it flows, but then it flows into a gritty place. I like that. Flows back, I would say.
Yeah, that's great. That's what I'm going for. That is what I was going for, particularly with that piece. So that's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. There's a certain tension almost between the gritty and the dreamy, and I think it's a very productive tension and very successful. I mean, I may ask you about that other novel, because I'd be interested in checking it out. But would I like to ask guests this. I don't know if it's a little too basic or something, but I think it's helpful. What would be your elevator pitch of the book for someone who hasn't read it? Like, what's the log line, so to speak?
Yeah, sure. I'm always bad at this, but I'll give it a crack. So it's House of Sleep is a psychodrama. I always say it's a piece of literary sci-fi first with the PSY, but about a burgeoning cult in which the followers are the followers of this charismatic guru are remembering their dreams as though they had happened yesterday. This cult, which is up on this picturesque plateau above the city, draws two characters who do not know each other, but sort of unbeknownst to them share a secret. One of them is trying to find her, is trying to have one last experience with her fiance, and the other is in search of his long lost brother. But the diving man, the charismatic guru figure, has different plans for all of them, and maybe even us. So the book kind of follows those lines. It's about grief, language, dreams, religion, heartbreak, and I think finally transcendence of a sort.
Yeah. Okay. That's a great elevator pitch. Yeah, and just to speak back on the kind of genre or style issue you're talking about. I mean, again, the magical realism thing. I think some people's minds would go there because there is a sort of magical dimension, or at least esoteric dimension, where you're writing about sort of, esoteric notions about dreams and about sharing dreams and subjectivity, and these are basically occult topics, but again, they're explored with the it's not that the workings of everything in the novel is totally spelled out, because it's not. It's very dreamy and surreal throughout, but nevertheless there's an attempt to ground every sort of fantastical element of the book in some version of psychological realism, and I think that's pretty unique. I haven't really read any books that do that.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, that's the one thing is I want, in reading it, I want people to go, wait, can he really do that? Or does it seem like he can do that? Exactly. Can that really happen? Or are you convincing yourself that that's happening? Right. I was really trying to play that line as carefully as I could.
Well, yeah, I know that line is played very well. It made for an interesting reading experience where, like, I think, at first it was like, I wanted to know, like, is he really doing this or not? And at some point I just let go. It's like, it doesn't really matter, how capital R real this is in the world of the book. The point is that this person believes it's happening. This person believes it's happening. And as we'll get into, and as I think maybe is a theme in the book, and definitely is what I hope will be a theme in our conversation today, this kind of, whenever you're dealing, and you read my tarot card 5 minutes ago, and it's like, is it real? Is it not real? And then the other question is, does it matter?
Right.
Believing that it's real, or believing that it could be real, or sort of accepting it in some kind of way into your life, accepting it into your narrative, and being willing to kind of consume it into your narrative and allowing it to affect you. That it's basically whether or not, when it comes to some of these type of topics, I feel like that's the operative question: is will you accept it? Will you allow it to influence your narrative? Does that resonate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think part of the experience of my life and being a fairly observant person and trying to think carefully. I mean, writing a novel forces you to think carefully in ways that, I think a lot of people maybe don't. And that's not to mean condescension. It's just writing a novel requires a lot of cognitive work. And so I have come, and living through the era that we're living through, I at least came to the conclusion of an epistemic crisis where it's like, I no longer am capable of knowing anything, of actually knowing anything. So how do you survive that psychically? Right? Like, how do you live when you have to admit you don't actually know anything? So I don't even know if the book on the surface deals with that, but that's my sort of subtextual project as a writer, is to figure out how you survive that.
Well, yeah, I think it is present subtextually in the novel, just by virtue of what it's about, which is, a burgeoning cult, as you say. It's about New Age thought, basically. Even before Lynn joins the Diving Man's cult, she's going through grief therapy, and you it's actually definitely one of the notable passages of the book for me is when you're describing all the things she tries, from making kombucha to sex toys, and it's a very well rendered little section there. And she's basically listing off all of these sort of post 60s, post New Age things that one can do to try and cope. So I say subtextual because it's just the setting of the novel. It's the air we breathe at this point. The 60s were a long time ago. All these New Age notions have become very diffuse in the culture, and they're part of the cultural air that we breathe. And in terms of the epistemic crisis, well, I think that whenever you can't really talk about New Age stuff without thinking about that. The sort of pop sociology, although I think it's probably true, is that people get more interested in occult and New Age, or it wouldn't be New Age because New Age is a new concept, but we'll just say occult topics in times of crisis and chaos within society, within the notion of received reality. And I think that in the West, perhaps in the whole world, we've kind of been this epistemically and otherwise chaotic position for decades. So I think that just by mere virtue of the themes alone, that becomes a theme in the novel and becomes a theme in the work that you do, Brad, in general. It's also, I would say, a theme in the work that I do, or that I'm beginning to do. We'll talk about this Substack piece that I wrote later on some of these topics. But just this notion of, you have the moment of epistemic, like letting go, like I don't really no kind of thing. I don't really have much to ground myself in. You can appeal to rationalism to a pretty significant degree, but then it always feels like either A, there's something else out there, or B, I really want there to be something else out there. Right. Either way, you're going to be looking beyond rationalism, but then also, and this is not, we'll also talk about this perhaps later, the tension between some of this new agey stuff and received tradition. Mm-hmm. It's a tension that I hope will one day dissipate to productive end. But it's all, my point in bringing this up is, even, and I have a lot of respect for people who are religious in a more traditional and traditionalist sense. However, it's not always that easy just to kind of appeal to tradition. Traditions are hackneyed. Traditions are weathered down. Some frog Twitter types say that they are even cuckolded. We don't necessarily need to get too far into that, but I see where they're coming from. A lot of these, as good as a lot of traditional religions are, even some of the ones that try very hard to be traditionalist are very much inflected with modernity, and it's like, well, what is the value there? I'm going on a tangent here, but go on.
No, that's okay. Yeah. This is fascinating, but I mean, part of I think what has come to my mind in recent years is like, okay, even the traditions, because I'm in this crisis of what I'm able to know, there are religious traditions, and I was raised Catholic, and I have a lot of respect for that tradition. I wouldn't consider myself a kind of practicing Catholic at this point. But
I'm in the exact same boat.
Okay. Yeah. So what I've kind of realized is like, okay, so there's some great things to that tradition. There's some great things to sort of, if we want to call it a tradition, the rationalist tradition, but then it gets turned around and used against us so often. I mean, we're in the era of scientism where we're just kind of told, shut up and listen to the science, but it's like, it's a corrupted institution. So in what ways is my tendency to think, well, everything should be rational? How is that being used against me? Right. And similarly, and this isn't even saying the Catholic Church was being used against me in some way, but like, how do I know if it is or not? How do I know that I'm not being sort of dumbed down in some way so that I don't ask a certain set of questions or try to live my life in a certain way? It's very difficult to know it's very difficult to know whether you're buying into a tradition or you're being psyoped, right?
Oh yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, with the Catholic, I don't want to just like spitball on this and say the wrong thing, because again, I do have a lot of respect for that tradition, and in many ways it is and will always be the tradition that I sort of came out of or was first exposed to. So this is just me talking off the cuff here. I'm not trying to offend anyone, but yeah, I mean, there is that notion that, again, you see it with a lot of like Bronze Age pervert frog Twitter types where they literally think not the entirety of the Catholic Church, and I think BAP has a great respect for traditionalist Catholics, but that a lot of it is literally a psyop and a globalist one or whatever, which I do not specifically subscribe to that, but I can see
I don't either, but I'm skeptical of institutions generally.
Yeah. I think that's what I'm trying to get to. I'm not necessarily convinced that the Catholic Church is a psyop, but I can see why someone might worry about that. And I think, it's that I'd have to put this in more like razor sharp philosophical language to really get at the meaning, but it's something about that epistemic crisis where it's like it's not even so much that I personally, Matt Pegas, distrust institutions. It's just that like I can't, like somehow the authority does not feel itself to be there, and maybe I wish it did, but somehow somewhere down the line, I don't know, the world got too big, the chain of network, something just didn't connect or something. I don't know. That's just my kind of emotional experience of it.
I'm in much the same boat. It's the kind of casting about, looking for some sort of institution or something institution like that I can put some faith in, and being constantly disappointed, and so left with a just a kind of a general homelessness, politically, religiously, philosophically, even.
I think homelessness is the operative feeling. Yeah.
Not to lead us too directly into Matt's essay, but I think this this inability to trust traditions as they currently exist because they're corrupted gives the opportunity to us to create new traditions, and
precisely
through art, through aesthetics. And it's a really weird moment because we have this opportunity, and we have this this burden even to to tell the truth as we see it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I mean, whatever we kind of come up with is going to be syncretic to some degree. It's probably going to have to be to some degree atomized and individualistic. Because everything is now, we're all, we're a subculture. We're 9 billion or however many subcultures of one at this point. So it's difficult to sort of network with other people and have anything that's entirely coherent and cohesive. But it's always interesting, it's always interesting. So, okay, so you're going to try to assemble some new kind of tradition for yourself. It's interesting to think about what are the aspects of other traditions or, schools of thought that you can borrow and bring into that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, definitely. A couple things resonated with me in what you just said. I mean, one, I just wanted to say again, I think, the sense of homelessness, whether spiritually, politically, perhaps literally, or perhaps just, that
not yet, at least,
sense of, hopefully not literally, but that sense of being atomized and being unmoored from tradition and from one's sort of, perhaps one's upbringing or one's tradition, history. Maybe not everyone's like that, but I think a lot of us online are, where we end up feeling that sense of alienation from our own, because we're not brought up in this small town type society where everything. I think about this a lot, and we talked about this. Dan and I talked about this a couple weeks ago with Caleb Cadell, who's another novelist. That traditional. There's that kind of traditional setup where you're brought up, in a tighter knit community with a received tradition, and one could lead their whole life as an operative part of that community. With that,
a lot of people have lived very satisfying lives that way. There's a part of me that wished I did have that.
Right. No, definitely for me. In some ways, I think that's like one of the most straightforward ways to be. But just the economic reality, and in the social reality of modern America, of the modern West, of the modern world, is that we are kind of, we sort of enter into the system and we're spit out wherever we land, sort of. I mean, I'm saying this as someone who was born on one coast and now lives on the other. So everything I'm saying is colored by my individual experience. But I feel like a lot of us, whether or not, we move away from where we grew up or not, a lot of us have some version of this experience where, even if it's just the world changing before us, there's this sense of being unmoored from the familiar.
Yeah, and I've definitely had that experience. So I'm actually back near where I came from, but I left for years and years. And now that I'm back here, it's odd that I have family and friends here, but I sort of don't feel like I'm from here. It took me a couple of years to really even be able to sort of emotionally navigate it. It's very strange.
Yeah, it's that sort of feeling. And again, even if it doesn't have to do with physical moving, it's the changing world. And I just think that we come back to that, epistemic homelessness, perhaps. And you said the 9 billion subcultures of one. I mean, that's quite. I don't think I'll call the episode that because I think we're talking about things, but that would be a good name.
Yeah.
Good
I might have got the population number wrong, but it's up there. It's got to be at least 8.
Something like that. Yeah.
But some of us are more than one, so
yeah. But within that, so it's, again, to go back to the received tradition versus kind of going off on your road and delving into esotericism or whatever the case might be. I have not found my attempts to I don't know if this is a word, but unmoor. If unmoor is a word, I have not found my attempts to remoor, to reroute myself to any particular tradition. I have sort of tried. I have not found them especially successful. I'm kind of left back in this atomized, sort of doubtful place where I struggle to, fully throw myself into, any one, broader received tradition. I may take a lot of influence from it, but I find that, again, just epistemically, I'm just dropping fucking philosophical words here, but we are sort of existentially atomized, and within that, not that there aren't pitfalls, and I think there are, and I talk about that in my essay, but within that, I think delving into a personal mysticism and esotericism is one of the most vital paths sort of available to us, is what I've found.
I agree with that 100%. And I think for multiple reasons. I mean, when you're talking about, okay, so you're living through some kind of crisis that is, both inside your head, but also in the world to all appearances. You've got to be able to hold on to the deck of the ship through the storm. And I think part of the way that one is able to do that is through allowing that there are at least holes in your rationality, that you're a limited being and you don't know everything and you can't know everything. And nobody has explained it all. And trying to get comfortable with that to some degree, that negative capability, that notion that, like, all right, well, I don't know everything, I can't know everything, and I have to not allow that to make me insane, basically.
Yeah, you have to embrace and I put this in my essay. I have to embrace and affirm the mess of everything, and then also the mystery. I think that's kind of the key. First step, shall we say?
Yeah.
And I do just want to convey also, I'm not necessarily opposed. Like I may or may not. I don't know. Like, I'm not opposed to maybe being involved in organized religion again. It's just the moment of my life right now is one of a more individualistic, esoteric exploration, I suppose. But I say that not just as a disclaimer, but also because, and this is another big part of the essay I wrote, which I guess we are at this point talking about it, which is fine.
That's cool.
It's called the Renaissance of the Ritual. I think probably some of our listeners have read it. I will link it.
It's great. It's great, man. Just before we get into it anymore, just want to tell you it's a significant piece of work. You should be very proud of it.
Oh, well, thank you.
I've shared it with some people, and I love it.
I appreciate that. It's not exactly taken the internet by storm, but I don't.
Hey.
But it's like, it's one of those, and I think this is a sign of something that you're like really meant to write, fiction or nonfiction. I kind of just started putting the idea for this together around Christmas time last year, and I was actually originally going to submit a essay to Passage Prize within the 1,000-word limit, and then I quickly was like, and this was like Christmas, so it was like a week before the deadline, and I was like, A, I'm not going to finish this. B, it's going to be way longer.
1,000 words is tough.
Yeah.
1,000, yeah.
I mean, there probably is a decent 1,000-word version of this that I could have written, and maybe it would have done well. But like at the end of the day, I was like, no, this isn't about Passage Prize. This is something I need to get out of me, and it really just flowed out of me. And I knew, it's these are pretty niche topics. Like I kind of realized that maybe not a ton of people would end up reading it, but I didn't care because the experience of writing it was so edifying for me. And I'm normally modest, but I agree. I think it is a pretty significant thing that I've written. I don't think it's like the be all end all on these topics, but I think from my angle with my unique set of experiences and my somewhat involvement with I engage with a lot of like frog Twitter type people in the essay, and I just have a kind of cursory little bit of esoteric experience, and it's kind of just a personal encapsulation of that. So it's, it's particular to me. I'm not saying it's like the grand theory of everything, but I do think it's a very honestly and well expressed understanding on my part of, again, this sort of epistemic spiritual moment of crisis and how I am dealing with it. And I think in that regard, I do think it's one of the more significant things I've written, and perhaps in time could find a larger audience.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think in the latter portion of it, you delve into a particular practice, and whether or not that's going to be the right practice for somebody else, it's hard to say. But I think the notion that it's actually picking things up out of the intellectual sphere and okay, now I'm going to try to do something and see what happens. That's part of what's missing to some degree from the sort of the very and I would count myself as one of them, the sort of the very online community.
Yeah.
I'm not clear that we're doing anything sometimes.
I hear you. Yeah.
Like I encounter plenty of people who are much, much smarter than me and say very insightful things and maybe they're doing incredible things in their lives, but it's sometimes feels like, are we just navel gazing? Did we all just learn a lot of big words? Or are we turning this into something that we can use to make our lives better and people around us better, to get closer to God or fill in the blank and actually accomplish something?
No, I mean, it's a recurring, it's not even just an online thing. It's also, you could say it's an issue for the academic community too. And what is the online community, but a sort of dissident academic community with better memes,
Right.
And it's a recurring issue. It did feel exciting when I was writing the Renaissance, the ritual piece, that I was like, yes, I am. And not just writing, but also doing the things I talk about in it. It's taking these intellectual ideas and living with them, to the full extent. I don't know if this is going to reflect super well on me, or some people might find this unbelievably cringe to even get into this. But I mean, and this is evident in the essay, that one person, not that I subscribe to everything he's ever said, but one online figure who's influenced me a lot is Bap, Bronze Age Pervert. And it's interesting because I read his book when it came out in 2018. I thought it was great. I loved it. I followed that for a while, but it was only kind of during the pandemic. And look, I don't like post my physique. I'm not like I'm not like a huge guy or anything. But like, it was only during the pandemic that I actually like started like lifting weights and actually like doing some of the stuff that those guys talk about. And Bap in particular, who's very holistic in his message about diet and working out, and he has his own. I mean, I think he's more of an esotericist than people even realize. He has kind of a holistic vision of human life that one can really apply to their life in like a super pragmatic way. And I know it sounds a little bit, again, I'm going to give this caveat. I'm not saying I'm like the Bap meme Chad guy. I'm not. But looking past the sort of goofiness of some of that and actually thinking about these things that people like Bap, that people like Mike Ma, others talk about as a really pragmatic thing to apply to your own life, has been, extremely, extremely beneficial to me. And I think that's a lot of what the Renaissance piece is about. It's about more than just Bap. It gets into some more squarely occulty kind of space. But it's the combination of Bap and just other people I was reading, Ma, Thomas Ligotti, not a Frog Twitter guy, but another person I've been reading. And he might have been
if he was 20 years younger.
Yeah,
or whatever.
I would think maybe he has done work with that guy from Current 93, David Tibet. So he's not entirely outside of our broader universe. But
well, it's interesting. The lifting weights thing is interesting to me. So I hit the weights pretty hard personally. I'm not a post physique guy either, but I've been doing it for a long time and not at my best now due to some recent injuries. But honestly, lifting consistently or just having vigorous exercise consistently is actually a magical act. So
yes, that's what I've learned.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Aleister Crowley calls magic the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will.
Right.
So literally transforming your body through an act of will. And so not only is it a magic practice in itself, but it carries metaphorical correspondences to all kinds of other things, right? You train your mind so that when you say you're going to do something, you do it, which is it sounds stupid. It sounds like a very like, well, yeah, you should just do what you say you're going to do. But most of us don't.
Most of us don't. Yeah.
We say we're going to do something and we kind of, halfway do it or we forget about it. But, if you go on a 6-week program to work out 5 days a week and then you actually do it, you have opened up a new like mental power, basically.
Right.
Also,
and it's
crucially, it's a ritual. It is something that if you've been doing it for a while, if you've been like I've been lifting on and off since I was 15, and so I'll be doing routines, and it awakens, it calls back to an earlier time in your life, and
Absolutely.
it's a through line. It's like I remember bench pressing when I was 17. And well, I'm not still doing it because of injuries, but I am doing other exercises.
Yeah, but yeah, no, it calls back to the times you've done it before in your life. It's also alters your consciousness too, right? While you're doing it, right? So it enters you into a more embodied, less frontal lobe mind space, right? Which I think is good to do.
Yeah, and that's there's the ritual element is important too, because it's this is even just like the 5 highly effective habits of highly effective people or whatever territory,
right.
But like some of this stuff, even if it sounds like that, and I talk about this in the piece, even if it just sounds like that, like don't underestimate the power of some of that basic self-help shit, because the notion of the ritual, which ritual habit, these are similar, these are related concepts. If you can ritualize it, there's a greater chance you're going to keep doing it. It's a way of bringing order to chaos, which is very operative in all of this talk.
When you turn it into a ritual, I think this does an important thing for you sort of mentally. When it becomes a ritual, you can stop intellectualizing it and asking these subtle sort of self-defeating questions about why you're doing it, right? You can kind of get past that why question and just occupy the ritual. Like,
yes,
do you need to squat twice your body weight? Nobody really needs to, right? But if you can just enact and not that I can do that much, but if you could just enact the ritual of going towards it, all of the other difficult to describe gains and benefits will come along with them, and partially because you just gave up to the ritual and let the ritual.
It's I think a lot of this could be described, and this one sounds somewhat negative, but I don't think it's negative. I think it's how you do anything in life. It's a form of self-hypnosis almost. You're especially for people like me, and I imagine people like you, smarter people, analytic type people, neurotic people perhaps in my case. It's so easy to get caught up in all the questions and the questions of why would I do this, what should I do. I mean, that's been my experience of life, especially since being a teenager, is caught up in all of those questions, and they're just so self-defeating. But you have to find your way to sort of hypnotize yourself into a rhythm to not be thinking about that. I think that is what one must do, and it's definitely sort of been my experience with this. I was going to say something else, but
I definitely agree with that. That's the thing is, like, there's stuff that I do that I would fits under the definition of magic, but I don't even like think of it in those terms. So the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, there's a book out there about how you can self-initiate into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, right? Okay, so this sounds like real woo-woo and real weird, and like, if you're into the cult aesthetics, it's really cool. Okay, so then you pop it open, and the first week of self-initiation into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn is every day you go for a 5 to 10 minute walk, and you basically log mentally as many details that you're seeing as you possibly can without judging them. So you'll walk along, you'll be like, Oh, there's a pop bottle on the ground. There's 3 cracks in the sidewalk. There's a squirrel. There's a chipmunk. There's a tree. There's a car. The car is a Chevy Malibu. It's got 4 wheels. It's like you try as hard as you can to keep up, and you don't judge any of it. You never say, well, that's an ugly thing, or that's whatever. You're just logging details. And if you do that for 5 or 10 minutes, you will feel slightly insane because it's a lot to do. You're just overloading your brain. But you'll notice, and if you continue doing it, you'll notice a slight uptick in your ability to pay attention, and more than to pay attention, but to notice.
Absolutely.
And that's like this is how you initiate yourself into this magic order. And then they have steps beyond that, but that's the first step. You just do that for a while. And is that magic? I don't know, but it's an interesting process, and I think you're better off having done it.
So I do a mindfulness meditation practice every morning, and so that, I mean, I just focus on my breathing, and I try to turn my brain off and just feel my breathing. And by the end of 5 minutes, I'm in, a different place. I'm actually kind of almost lucid dreaming. I'm just like having thoughts and stuff that I'm not judging, that I'm not like interjecting my own framing onto. And so like I don't really do it through like noticing things and walking around, but I think that aspect of removing your ego, removing your the narrative, the storyteller in your mind, that is a very powerful thing if you can do it.
Absolutely.
And it's hard. Absolutely. It's like, it's really, because you want to, that storyteller in your mind keeps coming back and back, and it's like, well, no, I know what this is about, and I'm going to tell you.
Right. I'm going to keep making sense of it. I'm going to keep making sense of it. And it's like, well, no, hold on. Yeah.
No. Meditation is something that I wish I did more, but I mean, that's kind of what you said. It's kind of part of the conclusion I come to at the end of that Substack is like, when I first, or not first, because it kind of has been an undulating thing throughout my life, but my most recent getting interested in occult topics, I was very willing to sort of go in and be like, okay, we're going to do some, Crowleyan will, manifesting stuff. Like, I'm ready for some specific outcome, like manifestation. But sort of by the end of delving into that, I found the stuff that I was practicing looked a lot more like meditation, yoga, even, or literally doing some yoga stuff, but also like just even that kind of what we're talking about with like weightlifting, like kind of approaching that like yoga, like these are movements I'm doing to, almost be closer to God or something. Looking at everything that way. By the end I found I was much more, it's less that I got interested in like capital, like things that would obviously be considered quote unquote magical, but more that it sort of reinvigorated the way that I approached what would be considered by most to be pretty standard spiritual practices, prayer, even just like, considering one's own desires and sort of ceding even to a higher authority, perhaps, ceding to a higher power, and even sort of meditative practices. Basically the stuff that I ended up settling upon that I still practice in my life. I have my own esoteric sense about them, but a lot of them I don't think divulge significantly from what would be considered fairly vanilla spiritual practice, albeit maybe with a little bit of an Eastern flavor from the Western perspective, but still, But I think we kind of sort of ended up just getting right into the essay. We'll definitely go back to House of Sleep before the end of the conversation, but part of how we got here, I think, is I was just going to, again, sort of reiterate the degree to which this that we've talked about, which, again, in the context of the essay I wrote, in the context of the conversation we're having, I think it's not so much that I love that we're all atomized and have to kind of go at this from this individualistic place and go at it from this sort of will-focused place where it's all about like our will and whatnot. I don't know if that's like the best social situation, but it is the one that we're in. And I do just find that considering things from a standpoint of like individualistic spirituality has a power that currently, for maybe not for all of us, if people are at home in their church communities, that's great. I envy that perhaps, but it has a certain power that a lot of us I don't think can really access elsewhere, and sort of delving into this stuff on an individualistic basis. As Dan mentioned earlier and as part of the piece, it's it could be the start of a new tradition, or even it could be a step that one could bring back to an old tradition. Right. I think there's either, but also I don't think it's totally, historically and perhaps for good reason, occult stuff has been very, very much at odds with received tradition, to the point of, persecution and whatnot and war. Right. Well, maybe not specific wars, but there's a contentious relationship to the point of violence. But
that's why it has to be hidden so often.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
They can be you can end up in the space of some dangerous ideas potentially.
Absolutely, and I think that's true. Again, I think there are certain pitfalls to some of this, but by their very definition, they're sort of hidden ideas. But the point I'm dancing around here is that I think that in this day and age, there could be a productive, collaboration between the two spheres. Absolutely. And I think that happens kind of on our sphere of the internet to a large extent, where you have everyone from traditional Catholics to sort of Nietzschean philosophical types to people like us and like others who, pretty outright deal in occult type ideas. I think there is a product, there is a lot of potential there for some kind of cross pollination, and not to ask too personal question. We don't have to put this in if it leads to a weird answer. But Kevin, your co-host, is he is a practicing Catholic, right?
He is, yeah. I think I don't want to totally speak for him, but I think he grew up Catholic and then has relatively recently in his life found his way back to it.
And I think that's fantastic too. But even just the mere fact that you who are very openly interested in the esoteric stuff, and Kevin who maybe he is somewhat more recent, but he is a Catholic. It's you have this podcast together. It's that kind of thing. It's like there's no reason for us to be at odds, so to speak. Yeah. Well,
and it's you look for Kevin and I are an interesting pair. I mean, I love that dude to death, and we see eye to eye on a lot of stuff that I don't see. I don't feel like I see eye to eye with many people on. And then we have some key divergences. There's some things that are like, nope, and we both kind of say that to each other, and that's cool. That's part of. If you're gonna survive a atomized epistemic crisis, you gotta know who your friends are and let them be themselves so they'll let you be yourself.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think a lot of people, the best people understand that. The worst people online are the people who want to gatekeep and constantly. But
agreed.
But the best people from across the spectrum, I think, understand that on some deep level, that there's a sort of aesthetic unity to what a lot of us are doing that kind of precedes everything, which, as Dan mentioned, I kind of cut my teeth early as a blogger. It's kind of cringe to remember now, but I had a blog called Alt of Center. Right?
Oh, okay.
I had some notion of alt center, whatever.
The alt center.
Yeah. This is 2018 fair. But one of my big ideas, or one big idea that I had gotten from elsewhere that I then presented, was the notion of a politics of aesthetics. And kind of basing one's politics in aesthetics. And I do think there's something to that with this notion of creating new traditions, somehow the aesthetic wavelength, which is perhaps also a spiritual wavelength, I think is more important than the intellectual wavelength sometimes.
Yeah, I know. They're difficult to disambiguate from each other. I mean, you know, why did I get sort of interested in occult stuff at some point? Honestly, it probably started as aesthetics.
Right.
Probably started at looking at cool old wood carvings and like weird old drawings and, you know, sketches out of Jacob Böhme and you know, just this stuff looks cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, me too.
Okay.
I mean,
so then it allows you to go to the next. Okay. Well, what is it actually? Who are these people? What is it? And then at some point you come across like that is actually a piece of wisdom that I found. But it all started because, you know, some interesting image that you saw or you know, crazy looking book. The title of some book was very odd and just piqued your interest.
Almost
you know?
Every successful spiritual or political movement has good aesthetics. And
that's 100% true.
It's not a coincidence. You need it to draw people in.
Yeah.
I mean, except maybe like Martin Luther's Protestantism.
Right.
But that's an aesthetic even of its own.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember Terence McKenna said something along the lines of like, I have no idea what the truth is, but it will not be cheesy.
Yeah. No, that's a good quote. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we covered this territory a little bit, but I was going to ask sort of how you got interested in, what do you want to call it, esoteric, occult, new age topics. Because I listened to, I don't think I listened to the whole thing because I was trying to do just as much research for this podcast as possible.
I appreciate
but
that.
I heard part of your interview with Aaron Gwynn where you, I don't think this is doxable, you have a background in engineering, right?
I do, yeah.
So
yeah, I do.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Yeah.
You're very enmeshed in this sort of rationalism of it all. And you kind of hit a point where you wanted something more than that?
Yeah, I would say, you know, went to college and just wanted to be financially independent as rapidly as possible, and so that meant
smart.
So that meant pursuing engineering, which I'm not. My brain isn't. I know a lot of engineers now, and my brain isn't quite wired like an engineer's. Though I can do a lot of the work, but was always writing. I mean, started writing and reading and writing very young, and so was always kind of in that space. Moved to the other side of the country and got an English degree after my engineering degree, just sort of part time while I was working full time, and then parlayed that into an MFA. So. Yeah, so I was an engineer, and then I wasn't for years. I stepped away from it entirely for 6 or 7 years, and then I had to kind of find my way back to it for the demands of living in, you know, in the current era, and having to make a living.
Well, dude, I'm kind of envious. It sounds like you have both great sort of literary life and a decently marketable skills, which that's kind of a holy grail. But
yeah. I mean, I'm certainly more interested, you know, in the writing and the reading, and would spend more time in that space if I could, and will spend as much time as I can probably for the rest of my life. You know, and I'm making some transitions that are happening now that are going to allow me to do that spend more time writing and researching for Art of Darkness and making some things happen in that regard. But in terms of coming into sort of occult stuff, it comes right along with writing. I mean, I sort of secretly believe that all writers eventually, whether they know it or not, become some kind of hermeticists. And for me, it's because you have to synthesize a lot of different ideas. You have to synthesize there's a craft element to it, obviously, but you have to be able to have at least some degree of psychological insight. You know, you have to have some degree of scientific I can never say that word.
Perspicacity.
Yeah, there you go. And a linguistic facility, obviously. But you have to be able to kind of put these things together, and that ends up leading one directly to some something like occultism, just because. So the Hermeticism is difficult to define, but my favorite definition of it is taking knowledge, turning knowledge into wisdom in the alchemical furnace of the heart. Right.
Yeah. Alchemy being a pretty operative part of Hermeticism. Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's, for me, that's what writing has been part of, is like, I have a lot of crazy thoughts all over the place, and how do I make them so it's a project and I'm not just flailing everywhere? Well, I'm going to write a novel, and it's going to allow me to indulge in learning about this thing and doing this practice and talking to that person. And ultimately it's all directed at putting a book together.
Yeah. It's like a psychological chemistry or alchemy. And there's there's also, I should add, it doesn't go for all literature, but it definitely ties into the theme of your podcast, Art of Darkness. There's that element of sort of turning darkness, turning black bile into gold. Or, the Philosopher's Stone.
For sure. I mean, part of the Art of Darkness has a long origin story in a lot of ways. Kevin and I were in graduate school together, and had a lot of time hanging out, and it was very exciting because we were at the Michener Center, which allowed us to basically just take classes and write for 3 years. And had a lot of conversations about whether artistic practice even belongs in the academy at all. Because there was a sense in which we're feeling like we're getting funneled, we're getting processed down, and could some of these artists that we love survive this artistically, or would it grind them into cubes? And the one hand, and this makes me sound like I'm skeptical of the whole process. It was an amazing experience for me to go there, but it did raise questions about how do I maintain, how am I going to do, can I still do something original and profound if I'm funneling myself through this process or not? So Art of Darkness, the show, partially comes out of us sort of having those conversations and going, well, all these artists that we know and love are insane, or they've got this problem or that problem, or life tried to destroy them, or they tried to destroy life, and they didn't have nice resumes.
They weren't type A people.
Yeah. Right.
This is for both of you, kind of, it leads into the project, the aim of Art of Darkness. But to what extent do we think that artistry, creativity, and darkness, mental illness, various neuroticisms, to what extent are they hand in hand? Are they inextricable from each other? To what extent does one fuel the other?
Right. I think in some ways that relationship of the crazy artist and the artist and their craziness is sort of a stereotype. And there are certainly exemplars of totally insane artists and totally sane artists, but I think it does require, the act in and of itself is slightly delusional. I'm reading the biography of John Berryman right now, and John Berryman is extremely talented, or was an extremely talented poet, but there's a phase when he's in his 20s where he's just a raging alcoholic on the verge of death from not taking care of himself, and he's at the same time basically saying, like, why am I not winning any awards? Like, what? Right? It's like this. He has this delusion of grandeur, and that delusion is actually necessary for him to bother writing the poetry. Right? So there is something, because for me anyway, I needed something to push against the nihilism of, like, there's no point in doing this, and that what I have used, and it's not so much as before maybe, but what I have used is delusions. Right. I will write this book and people will like it.
Yeah. No, definitely. Right. It's kind of,
and I have no reason to think that. Why would that be the case? Right. Yeah. In and of itself, and then you call this, and then maybe it does do well. John Berryman did eventually win all kinds of awards. And then what does that do to you? You talked yourself into this delusional state that you had something should come your way, and then it does come your way. It's a very crazy making kind of scenario.
Yeah, it gets into that some of the sort of esoteric topic we were on earlier about like, what does it matter? You know, is if you manifest things by kind of hypnotizing yourself into thinking they can happen, and then they do because you hypnotized yourself, does that make it any less real? It's that sort of dynamic where you kind of do have to be delusional, and you have to be willing to just envision what you want and not get caught up in the neurosis. Well, it's not always neurosis. Sometimes it's probably realistic, but that you can't get bogged down by the question of, oh, what if this doesn't happen? Or, oh, this probably isn't going to happen. Or, oh, no one's going to give a shit about this.
Right.
You have to.
It's self-defeating.
It's kind of like in your book. Not that I think that you would hold up the diving man's advice as as always being good, but he talks to Lynn about sort of there's an image of like hooking your grappling hook to a helicopter or something. It's like you have to be willing to reach for the sky and allow it to take you in this abstract way.
Right.
Or even and I do want to get back to House of Sleep and specifically ask about the diving man in a minute. So, even when he, the diving man is both literally and figuratively a diving man, where he, we'll get into the figured aspect in a minute perhaps, but literally he dives into water and holds his breath for as long as possible. And he kind of says at one point, it's like, if you believe that you can hold your breath, you can do it for longer and longer and longer. So it's that kind of image.
Right.
I'll ask more about the diving man in a second, but to finish the thought about Dan's question about sort of neurotic darkness and the arts, I basically agree with what you said, Brad, and I think that there is people kind of over romanticize like being a depressed artist or a bipolar artist. I think I'm kind of from the school of thought where it's less like depression and neurosis make good art, and more like they just happen to go along with that same creative
there's plenty of depressed people who don't make anything. Right. Yeah. I do think I think they end up being one and the same. An extra thing on this question, an added thought I have is so in part, to make a piece of art you have to be temperamentally open to a certain extent, right? And I think that I don't have any simpler way to say this, and so it may sound crazy, but the more you open up, the less control you have of what gets in, and that means, for lack of a better word, you might let in some demons.
Yes.
So you can get down into the neurochemical explanations for this, but it doesn't make any more sense to me than this idea that like you're kind of laying yourself open to let things come in, and some of that stuff is going to be good and some of that stuff is not going to be good, and that stuff can take you down, or you can make art out of it. It's psychically dangerous.
So more correlation than causation in terms of those demons and art. Though that being said, to get back to the hermeticism of it all and the alchemy of it all, I do think people sort of alchemize their darkness. So in that sense, maybe I'm not, no one wants to be depressed. No one wants to be crazy, but you can also, I think turn that black bile into gold.
And certainly being depressed gives you some psychological insights. If you think about, like, if you are paying attention to your own depression or your own anxiety or your own happiness or your own whatever it is,
absolutely.
If you get an exquisite, pristine, intense emotional state, no matter what it is, and you pay attention to it, that is stuff you can spin into gold for sure.
Absolutely.
There's that line from Fitzgerald, I believe, describing Gatsby, saying he had a heightened sensitivity to the possibilities of life. And that I always carry that with me as a description of the artistic temperament.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's absolutely true that if you have that heightened, and it sounds like, I'm describing a wimp or whatever, but if you have that heightened sensitivity, you need that to make good art, because if you're kind of insensitive to life, you might be better at being a businessman or a lawyer or what have you, but you will not be a good artist.
I agree. Yeah.
You need to be sensitive. But if you are sensitive, well, you're going to be sensitive to all manner of things. Right. Yeah. And that will not, you may not be a good businessman. You may not be, even, I would hate to think so, but in some respects, a good partner or friend.
Yeah.
Or you could be a better one. Yeah. It depends on how you use it.
Right.
Yeah. No, I don't want to delve too far into this, but like you hear about, and I think this is sort of what happened to David Foster Wallace, unfortunately. You hear about people who are depressed and then they take SSRIs and it makes them much more able to function in life, but they can't really create in the way they used to.
Right. Yeah.
So it's
that's always somewhat
tragic.
That's the scary thing. That is the scary thing about that medication, right? I've known a few people who were artists of one kind or another and spent some time on whatever it was, a medication, and said, I can't really get to the place I used to be able to get to creatively. It's not accessible anymore.
Yeah.
So maybe this is TMI, but I have tried SSRIs for a matter of, weeks, maybe a month. And I found exactly that, quieted whatever neuroses, whatever demons. I was, much more effective at my job and, probably much more even keeled. Couldn't write at all. Right. And so I stopped it. I'm like, I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
I can't do this.
Yeah.
And it's very, in my experience, it's very true.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Arguably the most interesting character in House of Sleep, and I think the one that you've said, Brad, is your favorite character, or was your favorite character to write, is the diving man.
Yeah.
This sort of, he's described somewhere as like, a little bit of Timothy Leary, a little bit of Judge Holden from Blood Meridian, Willy Wonka, sort of like even a little bit of a surfer bro aspect, kind of a lot of things. But he's this cult leader, or would-be cult leader, at the center of House of Sleep, and at the center of the retreat house, the titular House of Sleep in the book. Do you want to talk a little bit about him? And I'm going to ask this without giving too many spoilers. I thought maybe a question to spur some interesting details about the plot is, what is the diving man
what is he up to? Yeah.
And also you can also just talk about your experience of writing him, because I gather it was
what is he up to is an interesting question. I think he thinks he's saving the world, not in the realm of pentacles, but on the spiritual plane. He is somehow involved in saving humanity. Whether he is or not is a different question. And because he thinks that he is saving humanity, he is willing to do things that on other planes of reality may not be very commendable. So it's a means to the end. Any means are okay to get to his end. Whether his end is a valid one is a different question, I think. But that these are that aspect comes out of the thing where I think even the great villains of history don't think of themselves as villains. They have gotten themselves into a position where they, for the most part, where they think what they are doing is actually the right thing to be doing. And then historically we look back and we're like, oh, that guy was a monster. Because we don't agree with his
Adrian V.
Yeah. And it's like that's and I'm sure there's some exceptions. I'm sure there's some killers out there or whatever who are like, yeah, I am doing evil things. But for the most part, everybody thinks that they're living by their values. So he's doing that now. How is he doing that? By he's a guy who what's the Twitter phrase? I'm looking to put together a team.
Yeah.
So he's trying to bring in people into his circle that he thinks will help him in this battle for the soul of humanity. He is. I think things you sort of added to the description I think are true. There is a bit of a surfer bro element to him. He often speaks in the vernacular of the new age. Certainly from the surface, part of the appeal that gets people to the House of Sleep is this sort of like new agey, we're in this very idyllic atmosphere, and you're going to be eating healthy, and you're going to be living that sort of yoga lifestyle a little bit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Not to interrupt, I'm just curious. Have you seen the movie Safe?
I have not seen Safe. No.
Okay. Oh, you'd like it, probably. It's a Julianne Moore movie from the early 90s. Very good. It's not really that similar to House of Sleep at all. Beyond that, it kind of ends in this like very antiseptic like retreat center, and it just kind of, so for listen, it's not that similar to House of Sleep, although both are very good. But I just say it if anyone's listening who has seen Safe and has not read House of Sleep, if you want to envision what House of Sleep initially seems to be, it's like the weird desert retreat center at the end of Safe. But it is in Safe, the whole point is that's a safe space, whereas the House of Sleep is anything but.
Sure, yeah. No, I think that's right. It maybe seems safe at first and isn't particularly safe, partially because, not to give too much away, partially because, it becomes clear that what the diving man says are the stated intentions of the House of Sleep are cover for this other thing. He was an interesting. He's a sort of an interesting figure to write. He came to me in dreams before I ever wrote the book. I had, I don't know how many, a handful of dreams about this guy, and then the person who really kicked it off in terms of like, oh, this was the missing piece for what the diving man is all about, is actually Wim Hof. If you guys are familiar with him. Okay, so Wim Hof is this guy who broke all of these records about like swimming under ice and climbing Everest in jogging shorts, and he has these breathing techniques, and he legitimately does these things. Apparently, he was tested by a university, I think it was Princeton, maybe, that he can actually, through an act of will, change the alkalinity of his blood. Like
is he? Yeah, shit. I mean, he must be, even if he doesn't know it, he must be into some of the occult stuff,
and I think
right?
he presents it on the surface, and this made me, that just sounded like I think he's nefarious. I don't think he's nefarious at all, not Wim Hof. But yeah, I think if you go to his retreat, it's probably all like, here's how you breathe, and then if you go to his bookshelf, it's probably some strange esoteric and occult stuff. Yeah.
Definitely, because Crowley himself, who we mentioned earlier, was, I don't think he did anything on like a Wim Hof level, but he was a mountaineer and all this. Like these things go along.
Sure. And so getting kind of into the Wim Hof and learning about the breathing stuff and all of that was somewhat of the missing piece for me to understand how the diving man looks at the world and the human body and those sorts of things. I made the choice to write parts of the book from his perspective. Mostly, to begin with, I was just trying to understand what his deal was, and I didn't even know if I would include that in the book. And then I wrote a handful of these, and they're usually these short sections. They're like, I don't think any of them are longer than 3 pages. Usually they're a page or two. I just liked them so much. And there's probably three times as many of them that I wrote than that actually show up in the book. And they came really automatically. They required less editing than anything else in the book. And a lot of it was just about figuring out which one goes where.
Yeah. There are those little sections after each chapter where there's a little squiggly, and it's like No, they're excellent, excellent. No, I mean he's I don't want to give spoilers, but he's basically because again, as we said, there's parts of the book that are very dreamy, and I would say some of the diving man's intentions are a little bit mysterious, but he basically wants to usher in a new reality, a new paradigm.
I would say that, and he wants to put himself somewhat at the center of it.
Kind of like almost a demiurge.
Yeah, he thinks he's going to be able to do it through a sort of a convoluted magical process, taking advantage of these people he's gathered around him. Yeah.
Right. So it's basically the House of Sleep is basically presented to Lynn, the protagonist, who, as I think we mentioned, is dealing with the loss of her fiance. It's basically presented to her as like a grief
she's tried these things, and it's like, well, okay, this sounds cool. This sounds like this will be good, or this will be the thing that I might need to heal, which in the New Age community is what you find. Part of the inspiration for this book was I spent a fair amount of time in that New Age community, specifically around ayahuasca ceremonies. And despite the fact that House of Sleep ends up having these sort of negative connotations, I had nothing but positive experiences in the ayahuasca community. But what you do see is the kinds of people that seek it. And some people have a big hole in their life, and they're desperately trying to figure that out. And so they try things, and some people come across something like ayahuasca, or something like this crazy, in my book, this crazy retreat that in which you're remembering your dreams as clearly as they had happened yesterday. And that's their approach. It's a fairly extreme measure to try and find something to heal that thing that's going on with them. And then other people are just curious, right? It's just like, oh, this sounds weird. I need to see what that's all about. So
and there is a chemical dimension in House of Sleep too. They take a drug called One, which is basically how
that's whatever chemical. We don't go into the chemistry of it, but
how they do what they do.
It puts you, it makes your dreams, you remember them. Yeah.
So, and it's we'll get into psychedelics perhaps now, but I've never done ayahuasca. I've actually never done any psychedelic drugs. But I due to, I suppose, something of a what I perceive as a neurotic temperament on my part. I fear them. In short,
that's a perfectly reasonable fear to have, I think, for anybody. It's scary stuff.
But so I don't speak from a place of experience, but my sense about ayahuasca, it's not that it makes you remember your dreams or anything like that, but it is basically, even compared to some of the more day-to-day type psychedelics like LSD and whatnot, it's a fairly dreamy experience.
Absolutely. I mean, you'll have psychic experiences. You will have deeply synesthetic experiences. You will have encounters with non-human entities. You will, and make of those, any of those. I don't make any cosmological claims, but experiential claims for that's what it's like. You'll feel every feeling that has ever been felt.
I see.
And it's a tremendously deeply aesthetic experience as well. I mean, it's beautiful. It's unbelievably beautiful in a lot of ways.
You you talk about you're Brad. You're big in sort of like the as being you're a proud member of like the online writing community, and you're always giving like you're giving like good writing advice. Yeah. But one interesting, one and we'll talk more on that later. But one piece of advice that I found interesting, a little more that had some more color to it, perhaps, was that your recommendation for a young writer is to have a soul shattering.
Yeah, absolutely. Experience. I totally agree. I mean, check with your doctor first, but yes, for most people, and especially if you're setting out on an, if you're like, I want to be the best accountant that ever accounted, that piece of advice maybe doesn't matter. But to me, artistically, and partially, I think that comes from me being a fairly, by temperament, being, I think, a fairly rational person, I needed to have some walls knocked down. So it ended up being quite important for me. And maybe other people don't have that problem, but.
Yeah, no, my experience is such that the walls being knocked down is a great metaphor, because we kind of live our lives in a maze of the structures that we have created to explain the world and the universe, and these hallways that we walk through, and a psychedelic experience, depending on the nature of that psychedelic experience, can knock down those walls, and suddenly you see things in a totally different way, because you're not seeing them the way you see them, because your ego has you're depending on the experience again, but you are maybe apart from your ego, and you're seeing things in a way that you've never seen them before. And that is, that's very powerful for art, and powerful just for you to take with you.
I absolutely agree with that. And I mean, there are so many sort of levels to it. So it's always tricky. The one thing I've noticed is the sort of this part of Twitter that I am on, I don't even know what it is. I guess it varies from day to day. There does seem to be recently, even I've noticed, and maybe it's just because the people I've started to follow more recently, there does seem to be a skepticism or a condescension towards the psychedelic experience, which and it seems like it's picking up lately for some reason. Maybe it isn't. Maybe I'm just imagining it.
There's ebbs and flows to these things.
And I do understand it. It, to me though, this isn't like something I'm doing all the time, or frequently by really any measure. And there are ways to do it, and that I think are more productive, if that's the right word, and ways to do it that are less productive. The one thing I think I've come to realize is important is to take it very seriously. I had a lot of misadventures in my youth that were just sort of like, here's some stuff and here's some people, and we're going to just, eat these mushrooms and have a weird night. And, that wasn't the worst thing ever. But it wasn't conducive to the kinds of psychological health things, the spiritual aspects, the creative aspects. It didn't really feed into that all that much, rather than, as opposed to doing it in a much more intentional fashion.
Setting is so important. It's, I mean, like if if you take something in the middle of a club, you're going to have a very different experience. You're going to have perhaps a terrifying
I've been there.
experience.
I've had that experience. It's not good. Yeah.
Or it's a very different experience than being lying in your bed with a blindfold and just, psychonauting into your
head. It definitely is. And if you do these things, and this is another thing that's been interesting about the ayahuasca tradition. I've only done ayahuasca ceremonies with people who have been doing it for a long time, have learned aspects of none of them would call themselves shamans, but have learned sort of aspects of the shamanic arts through lineages that have been going on for a long time. I mean, people who were drinking ayahuasca in South America thousands of years ago. And getting and the care that they show for their practice is literally to prevent evil spirits from entering the room. And nobody forces you to believe that, but it's like you can believe whatever you want as a participant, but as the shaman, the person running it, they're sort of like, but I know that if I don't do this, bad things are going to happen in this room. So I'm going to do some stuff that looks very woo-woo to everybody else, but I know after thousands of times doing this that it's incredibly important for everybody's experience in the room. Yeah. So you get they aren't wrong. So so you get smudging and Palo Santo and praying, and the music happens in a very particular way, and you ingratiate yourself to nature and all of these things, and it's to me is an important part of the whole process. And this is how you keep demons from getting in. Literally, like I don't know if literally, but almost.
I don't doubt it.
Yeah,
it's a powerful thing. Like when you are, standing apart from your ego and the way you interpret events, and you realize like, oh, it's actually like the first, lines of your novel. The mind is an ocean. It is an ocean. It's this roiling thing. And when you step away from, and I'm grateful when I come back to it, because I'm like, well, thank God I have this ego, this way that I can navigate the world, because it's impossible if you don't have, like, the ego is like, it's good to step away from it, but if this little buddy isn't there, you're just going to be
lost. I mean, you won't know, the most extreme example is you won't be able to feed yourself because you don't know what mouth to put the food in. Like you need to have a certain amount of self-interest, right? But to be able to step away from it and kind of reassemble it upon re-entry is super, super valuable. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't doubt it. I don't doubt that the psychedelic experiences are extremely valuable, and maybe I will do it later in life, and maybe it's not for the worst. I think it's kind of a notion that like, oh, you do that stuff in college, and I did not. But also, and some college students might do it in a
I'm sure there are
spiritually serious way, but a lot of them don't. So maybe it's for the best that I have this.
Yeah, you might be able to come into it with a very come into it very deliberately and very, you'll do some reading beforehand and think about how you're going to try to lay out the experience and all that kind of stuff. And
certainly that's how I do it. I mean, I'll just say, because I think it's a little bit interesting, I have never done psychedelic. I was like revved up to like many American kids, like revved up to maybe try them in college or whatever. And then, but I had barely even like smoked marijuana or anything in high school. So I early on in college, I just take this massive bong hit that I'm not ready for.
No.
I know it sounds dumb to some people because some people like never have bad experiences with pot, but oh my God, like I actually felt like I was in hell. Like you talk about demons. Like I felt like I was like, I've never in my life, and this is just one hit of marijuana. Yeah, it's kind of weird, but this was my experience. I never in my life had felt so much like I was in the presence.
I get that. One of the worst drug experiences, in particular, because it didn't have any redeeming qualities to it at all. Like sometimes, like a bad trip you ended up having to confront some stuff you really needed to confront, so it sucked, but it was good in the long run. But like one of the worst and unredeemable drug experiences I ever had was eating an edible that was a little bit, too big for my britches.
Right, and you hear this a lot. That's actually one thing that makes me think, oh, maybe psychedelics are, because like that experience scared me off of like.
I mean, I had
never wanted to go back there.
Basically. Yeah, it was difficult.
But I'm sorry to hear. But increasing, like in years since, this was like 2014, 2015 when this happened to me. So it was like, oh, pot's so mild. But in the years since then, as marijuana has become legal in more places, and people have started talking about it and how much higher content it has of THC, I hear more and more people saying what you just said, that my worst drug experience ever. So I don't know. Maybe I actually. I always assumed if I couldn't even handle THC, then I should never try anything else. But it's quite possible that THC in high doses. Let
me give you. I have one piece of advice. Only one piece of advice. I don't have any dogmas about any of this stuff. But and this is for anybody who's listening who might be curious to go in these waters. If you are having a hard time sit up straight and sing. Just sing anything. Doesn't matter what you sing. It can just be repetitive. It can be beatboxing. It can be a song that you like. You could be making it up. It doesn't matter. Just sit up straight and sing. And I guarantee it'll be better.
No, that's interesting. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't know if I'll ever try this stuff, but it does, just to bring the conversation in a circle, it does seem like this is one way to let go of those pentacles,
a little bit. You know? Yeah. You gotta come back and hang on to them at some point, but it doesn't hurt to occasionally have a. I mean, it's called a trip for a reason, right? It's not a bad idea sometimes to take a trip it's not a bad idea to take a trip in the real world either, right? To go on a trip to some place you've never been, and doing it sort of inside the confines of your skull in a safe, relatively safe way, is good. I mean, the other thing I think people talk about, sort of the dangers of this stuff, most of it from a chemical standpoint is very safe. Mushrooms in particular are probably the safest thing you can take that we call a drug from a chemical standpoint. But in terms of sort of psychologically, there are some risks, but to me, there are also, like, the risks are less than my Twitter addiction.
Yeah.
I'm just constantly bombarding myself with info hazards, and to think that that's somehow taking a mushroom is going to be worse than that is debatable, at least.
Right. And it seems like, you hear about like acid burnout or whatever. Like, it seems like if you approach it with the right amount of seriousness, and don't necessarily do it every weekend in terrible settings, like it seems like you'll be fine. It seems like most, a degree of moderation, but I
think the thing with the acid burnouts is that's a real thing. I think what a lot of that is doing it a lot before like the age of 25. Doing just hundreds of doses before your brain is even stabilized and you even know who you are. I think that's risky for sure. But once a year or once a season as a full-grown adult who knows who they are, in a careful situation, a deliberate way, I think it's mostly going to be good for most people.
Also, this is not medical advice. I'm not a doctor, despite what anyone may think. But schizophrenia, which is probably what we're dancing around, is the notion that you will take psychedelics and awaken latent schizophrenia. That is something that is, from what I understand, more likely than not to come out when you are 18, when you are a young adult. I mean, where I think Matt's a little younger than I am. I think maybe we're about the same age, but I think none of us are really young adults anymore. And
so if you were going to have some kind of genetic predisposition to a particular kind of mental illness like schizophrenia, it would have already happened. Probably. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Again, it's like I'm not saying I'm gonna go out and now do this stuff, but it's probably not the worst thing that at 27.
It's a
not
obviously everybody's got to come to this with their own. I find myself in an odd position with it because I do you guys know Owen Cyclops on Twitter? Yeah, so he has a great thread about it's an old thread, it's been around for years, but it's fantastic, about demonic forces in the DMT experience, and basically why he says you shouldn't be doing this stuff at all. It's funny because I agree with his thread almost entirely, and at the same time I think all of the risks he talks about are 100% real, and I think you can still have the experience and navigate the experience and dodge them. So,
yeah, no, it's like that's my impression of them, is that, and also I think and this is one thing I wanted to ask about, the relation, maybe it doesn't, it's almost like so basic it barely needs to be talked about, but the relationship between psychedelic experiences and the occult stuff you're talking about. It's experientially they're different, because the occult stuff is about certain usually practice under sober mind, though not necessarily. So sometimes there's literal crossover, and psychedelic experience is a drug experience. So, but they're kind of part and parcel.
Yeah,
of the same
I think
thing,
so. Yeah.
And within that, as I said, that I believe there are pitfalls to the occult stuff. It's like, I think, yes, you are entering into a realm where there are demons. Whether you interpret those literally or figuratively, you are delving into a spiritual dimension, and there's a light and a dark side.
Absolutely,
to that 100%. Dimension, undoubtedly. But it doesn't necessarily mean it should be avoided entirely. Just with a degree of caution might be the operative word. Although, as you said, I said I fear psychedelics, and you said that was valid, and I think it's because, again, not to be too literal-minded about it, but it's this sense that I may come into contact with something hellish or demonic.
I mean,
literally feel that.
I have encountered those things, right? Like, I don't. They're there. They're in there. Yeah. Yeah. So
it's wild.
Yeah.
Okay, well, just a couple more questions here. Do you want to, and we talked about this a bit, but do you want to, what sort of new age practices do you engage in, Brad, to the extent you're comfortable? And you can also just parlay this totally into talking about.
No, I'm happy to talk about it. I mean, I don't have a ton of different practices. I have that would be considered new age or occult even, but I have actually, I circled back around after doing a lot of different things to literally just praying in the morning. So I have I have a gratitude sort of ritual in which I think of 3 things that I'm thankful for: one small, one big, and one that's negative. And I thank God, I guess, for those. And then I have a sort of an affirmational sort of poem kind of thing that I came up with that I use to orient myself for the day. And then and this is pretty much every day. And then I sing for 3 minutes or so. I just make something up. And this is something that came out of my ayahuasca experiences, where the music was so integral to that experience that it's sort of like a means for trying to get momentarily closer to whatever God is. And it's like, I don't speak his language, and he doesn't talk directly to me, but somehow if I sing, and I'm not a musically inclined person generally, like I don't play an instrument or anything. And this thing that I sing it's basically glossolalia. It's rhythmic, but beyond that, I don't think it has any artistic merit whatsoever. It's really not about that. But in that moment, I feel several minutes of communion. That's
amazing. Well, I think
that's and I have a couple of other things too. I will do I do a concentration exercise occasionally, in which I just I try to bring as close to possible I will look at something, usually I have a little statuette of an owl. I usually use that just because it's handy, and I will look at it, and then I close my eyes, and I try to maintain the image of it and look at it from as many angles as possible for as long as I can, until I can't see it anymore.
Yeah, a little bit of transcendental meditation in there, perhaps. I just think it's case in point, and this is, again, the conclusion that I end my renaissance of the ritual piece with, that, I don't know, maybe it's perhaps similar to psychedelics, too. You hear about people finding very ostensibly wholesome types of practices through psychedelic experience. You start off, maybe you're coming from a more atomized perspective. You start off, you're willing to delve into the unknown wherever it leads you. There's an openness, but sometimes where you end up is, again, like, there's nothing about in what you just described that goes against the teachings of most traditional religions. In fact, traditional religions basically deal in the same stuff. I mean, I think that was a big part of the point I was trying to make with my Substack, is that like these are, through sort of occult research and practice, you can sort of find what I, not being a, you know, trained psychologist or religion studies person, but like what seemed to me to be like the basic elements, the basic stuff that is then transmuted and reified into tradition. And I think that everyone can kind of rediscover, no matter where they are, no matter if they're cut off from tradition or not, if they're on a deserted island, you know, you can still tap into that basic sense of mystery and the basic sort of aesthetic responses one can have, whether it's song or meditation. You can always tap into those basic responses. And I think that's kind of an amazing
and there's just a bunch of, there's just many ways to get there. You know, right? There's many roads to kind of the same place, for sure. And the other thing that I engage with less often for myself, because I think for an individual, you can actually overdo it, is tarot. So I write, I try to do it once a month, but I've been a little bit delinquent. I write sort of investigations of one card at a time. I'm going to do that whole deck. It's going to take me years. I do.
You have that on your website,
bradkellyesque.com. You can find it on there. And I've done, I think, 12 or 13 now. There's 78 cards in the deck, so I do one a month. It takes a while. But there's a lot of value in that to me. I usually give myself a reading maybe once a season or so. Usually not very more often than that, though my writing about the individual cards requires me to go pretty deep on that one card. So you could say that I'm giving myself kind of something like a tarot reading all the time. And the value in that is there's again, there's a lot of woo-woo around it. I don't use it for predicting the future at all. To me, it's a system for thinking more carefully about what's going on. So you get a symbol and you're sort of posing yourself as like, what about my life makes sense in conversation with this symbol right now? And then you're doing a spread. So you're doing multiple symbols and putting them into a narrative, and you're kind of telling yourself a story about yourself, and you're making it kind of, you're bending the symbols so that they make sense for your own life. And oftentimes I get pretty profound insights about, you know, who I am and what I'm doing and what should I be doing next, and what kind of sense can I make of this thing that happens to me, and all of that. So it's like having it's like if you had somebody in your neighborhood who's really wise and you really respected their opinion, and every once in a while you went to them and you asked them some questions. And they weren't able to say like, this is exactly what's going to happen to you, right? They're just kind of sharing their wisdom. Oftentimes, if you ask the tarot a question, the answer it will give you, or at least my perspective of the answer it will give you, is it will start to poke holes in why you were asking that question to begin with, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, you have all these things. I think it's important to kind of bring them back down to earth a little bit. It's not about, as you said, it's not about predicting the future. Yeah. It's about...
there might be some metaphysical qualities to it. I mean, I don't think there needs to be, I guess, is the thing. Yeah.
Right. I think exactly. And I think I might say that in my piece too. Like, you can be... It's probably good to be open to the metaphysical and the transcendental possibilities in some of this stuff, because that makes it that much more interesting and fun. But I think it's perfectly acceptable to be very agnostic about it, and that one almost must be, because otherwise, if you take it too literally, it's going to be yet another form of
I agree with that.
Probably, right. So to just embrace it as an aesthetic experience and allow it to influence your life, I think, is where the reward lies, and that's also the relation between some of this stuff and art. You know, it's you're doing something creative and you're allowing it to influence your life, but then you're not clinging to it too tightly either. You just kind of let it be. You approach it with a certain
and the artistic
zen.
process isn't as easy to disambiguate from any kind of religious or mystical or whatever practice, really. I mean, I was kind of giving you my quick breakdown of what I do in the morning to sort of get myself in the right place. Most mornings I then immediately write. So whereas the
right,
so the lines between these things are a little bit blurry, right? So they all kind of come together, which doesn't mean that for somebody who hasn't read my stuff and may be interested in, it's not like I'm right. These are not like religious texts. House of Sleep isn't like a religious text, though it touches on religion. So it's not when I say it's sort of bound up in anything like a mystical practice, this doesn't mean this is like whatever the Revelations or something, right? It's right. But you are definitely. It's a novel, yeah.
It's a novel, but still,
exactly. But the lines between something like a prayer and something like writing a novel, I don't think the lines between those two things are as clear as they may seem.
Yeah, no, I agree. Especially kind of once you start to delve deeper into this, you realize it's all coming from the same place within you, and to not strictly regiment each experience, I think is beneficial. That provides a natural segue again, because you do post some good writer. Right?
Yeah, I hope I do. I'm just trying. I'm just like Twitter. Everybody else on Twitter. I'm trying to get followers, but also
right. But it's a lot of the stuff you say is just the basic advice that is nevertheless good to be reminded of over and over. I mean, basically, what does it come down to? Writing every morning?
I try to be every morning, and usually that's required some shaping of my life because I have a day job, so that means waking up at about 4 o'clock in the morning usually. So so which then requires going, it distorts a normal life to some extent, for sure. It took me a long time
to get a better morning writing practice.
How many hours you put in?
I do kind of like a loose Pomodoro thing where I write for like 25 minutes and then I take like a 5-minute break or whatever. So and then because the engineer part of me needs to keep track of things, or else I'll feel like I'm not doing anything, I usually get somewhere between 20 and 25-minute sessions in a week. This isn't a lot. It's like 10. It's like 10 hours.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
It's pretty good. Yeah. No, I'm not gonna lie. I definitely asked that because I was worried you were gonna say, like, I write for 4 hours before work.
I'll give you a hint. So I had when I was in graduate school, Alan Gurdanis, who wrote the great book Oldest Living Confederate Widow Tells All, is a great man. He told me nobody writes for 4 hours or more than 4 hours a day, and if they tell you they do, they're lying. That might be one day. Maybe you might have a one-off day or you do it with a deadline or something, but he's like, nobody is consistently writing for 4 hours. Most people aren't wired that. You're not wired that way.
How much can you have in your soul? I don't know. Go on.
I had a period where right when COVID hit, I was furloughed, and so suddenly I had a lot of time, and so I kind of bore down, and I started really writing my novel. And so I wrote every day. It was my job. Awesome. And I rarely wrote more than 4 hours a day. Like, that was the upward limit. And that was of necessity, because like I couldn't really write more than that. It was like, that was all my creativity was going to give me that day. And like, also, like, you need to maintain a normal life to write. You need to be going out and exercising. You need to be making dinner. You need to be you can't. I mean, I guess you could do the Stephen King, I'm on cocaine and I'm writing a novel in like 3 days. That's perhaps.
Well, he's a freak of nature. He's a freak of nature too, right? I mean, whatever you think about Stephen King's books, he's written
a lot of them,
and they're competent. Even if you don't like them, they are competent, right? They are like, that's a book. Those are real books. So yeah, that guy's a freak of nature. I mean, I had a similar experience in grad school. I didn't have any responsibilities but to write. Like I literally didn't have to do anything else, and 4 hours was the most if I had a streak of more than that for more than a couple days, everything else fell apart. I started drinking too much, I was smoking too much, wasn't talking to people, like just yeah, it's no good. So.
And other people don't understand. Like you'll be like, "Oh yeah, I wrote 1,000 words today," and they'll be like, "Oh, okay." but for you, it's like, "Wow, this is a productive day in my own mind."
Day. Yeah. 1,000 words should be a good day of writing in anybody's book, I think.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. No. With I'm on like a 1 hour before work type schedule now, which works. I do find the morning is for the reasons everyone says is the best because your mind is freshest. But yeah, no, I just want to say, like, the writing habit is like anything else we were talking about. It's kind of you have to sort of hypnotize yourself into just doing it and doing it as a ritual. Ideally every day, if you can.
Yeah, I'm going on a little vacation soon, and I'm really looking forward to it. But I'm also like, oh man, that's gonna be like 2 weeks again back on track. A week away will be like 2 weeks to like I'm back in a rhythm. Yeah, it's very disruptive.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, and it's all about
really
that.
Is
all about
one
that
day
rhythm.
To the next, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've kept you 2 hours.
Yeah, this
been
is
a great
this
conversation.
Has been awesome.
Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to getting this one up.
Great catching up, and
it's good to it's good to meet you guys too, and put interacting with each other on Twitter and stuff, and it's cool to like actually put names to face. It's so funny. I've like actually met so many, not in person, but this way. I've met so many Twitter people now. It's really cool to just the benefits of the internet is the sort of the promise was like, oh, you get to meet you'll get to actually meet like-minded people, and I feel like that's only actually come true for me in the last year. So it's been really cool, and this is definitely part of that. So
absolutely.
All right. Well, unless either of you have anything to add, I think we can
just
sign
listen to
off.
Art of Dark Pod. We got I'm gonna promote. I'm learning how to promote myself. So and Kevin would kill me if he heard this and I didn't give the.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Definitely listen to Art of Dark.
We've got an episode on
podcast.
Chelsea Hotel coming out next week, and we just did an episode on H.P. Lovecraft, which. I
got to hear the Lovecraft one because I'm a fan. And I got to listen to that one. But yeah, also people should check out Brad's website, Brad Kelly.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, and I'm on Twitter at Brad Kelly Kelly, and I'm on there all the time, so I'm easy to find.
Yeah, I just want to say about Brad's website. I mean, you have plenty of links and reviews of House of Sleep on there. Again, you obviously did a good job sending it out pretty widely because there's a lot of different. Kinds of. You even got a Kirkus review.
I do. I've actually. I do. I've got a pretty positive Kirkus review, so that's exciting. Coming from the self-published world, this is hard. It's difficult to get attention. So I'm gradually learning how to do it. So that has been a lot of fun.
No, you got a lot of good Amazon reviews, dude. You definitely got the book out there, and you have some short stories up there too, and that tarot. Those tarot card descriptions we mentioned. So
and one thing I'm not very good at promoting, House of Sleep at bradkellyesque.com. The first third of it is actually free in audio, so you can find it. You can find it there. Just click on it. You can listen to it like Spotify or whatever, just like you listen to a podcast. That's totally free. You can get a taste. I'm not a very good voice actor, but it's there. so.
Nice. Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty brilliant way to get out there. I actually kind of want to do that with my book.
It's a lot of work, man. About that. I was going to do the whole book, and we just gave up.
Oh, I'm sure.
This is too much. I got to do other things. So,
All right. Well, I think with all that being said, Brad Kelly, it's been great having you on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely.
Be well.
Great to have you on.